We're live. Good afternoon, everyone on the West Coast. Good early evening to those on the East Coast. We are grateful for those that may be listening on Central and Mountain Time. Share this, share your page. It's going to be a great conversation. Share your page, Like it if you're out there to let us know that you're out there. Share this page, like it, start a watch party. Jordan, feel free to share this on Mount Sinai for the Hurting Facebook page via my page. We are grateful today to have a special guest with us, a close and dear friend. We want to apologize for yesterday technical difficulties. We've already rescheduled our time with Jeremy to talk about the importance of creatives controlling their content and the brave step that he took with his relationship with the show Dear White People. And we look forward to picking that conversation back up on next week, and it'll be on all of our platforms. Please ignore the advertising. You can watch all of these interviews on our Hurt for the Hurting YouTube channel. And then on Monday, we're grateful for our conversation with Mark. And this coming Saturday, we'll have the webinar. The registration information is available. Just cash app him directly that $50 fee. If you have any trouble, any technical trouble, just register and show up. We'll make sure that the fee portion get covered. We do have a max of 50 people. So please, ma'am, please, sir, if you're interested in going, don't hesitate, don't procrastinate, don't wait. Go on there now and register on our Facebook page, and we'll make sure we'll get that postcard out there with that information there. We're looking forward to having that conversation and making people into Proverbs 3, 9, and 10 people that can honor the Lord with all of their wealth, not just the percentage they may give towards ministry, but the other 90% if that's a 10% for some. And then tomorrow, be on the lookout for our conversation this same time with Wayne Cooper. I know many of you watched the debates on last night, the debates that was a debacle, in my opinion. We'll let Erika give her opinion on that as well if she watched it. But certainly is get in the ark, children. It's about to rain. It's bad out here. It's worse than you think it is. And it ain't just one person. It ain't just one party. This is a collabo with a lot of special guest appearances. And so we'll get into a lot of that tomorrow with Pastor Cooper. We'll learn a little bit about him and his ministry at the same time. However, for today and for now, as you make your way into the room, I'm excited. First of all, anytime to talk to people that are friends that I consider family, but then also for you to learn about not just her personal journey that we'll get into as a mother, but her professional journey, her life journey, a little bit, a glimpse of, her educational pursuits, her investment at Lilly, one of the leading pharmaceutical companies in our country, if not the world. But then especially to talk about her journey that many people, I talked to many young ladies, many women who have contemplated this, but was unsure about it, stigmas and maybe even questions from a theological standpoint. Is this right to do? And we're going to have those conversations. And certainly if you're listening and you're in that, and this information is helpful to you, we pray that you use it. If you don't understand it and it's not helpful to you, we pray that you would operate in the ministry of shut up and sort of be sensitive to the fact that men, especially men, seem to have an infatuation with women and their bodies and making decisions about that and try to moralize that to disguise their misogynism. And so I hope we can tear that down at the same time in this conversation. But before we get to that, Erika, how are you doing today? How are you handling all this pandemic and all these things going on?
Yes, I'm doing great. It's great to be able to be on here with you, my old friend from college. So that's always nice. As far as how I'm handling the pandemic, I think I'm handling it like a lot of people are. From the perspective of I'm one of the fortunate people as far as work, where I get to work from home. So that has been a blessing for a number of reasons. We're going to get into talking about my daughter, but one of the great things about being able to work at home, at least right now, is I get to actually see her from time to time during the day
Right.
and catch some of the milestones that I wouldn't be able to if I were traveling for work. So that's one thing. But I think it's been hard on everyone, and we've all had to adjust.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail that many of us are blessed enough to be able to work from home, have flexible schedules, still receive our regular income, some even increase. But so many others either have to put themselves in danger by being on the front line or find themselves without work, the steady work. They're being furloughed, hours are being reduced. And so definitely that you hit it right there on the nail. Tell us where you're from. Tell us where you're from. Let the people know where you're from. Where you from?
So I'm trying to see if George is okay with me saying I'm from Detroit. Technically,
Yeah.
I'm from a suburb of Detroit, but I'm from Detroit, Michigan.
No, you're close enough. Southfield is close
right,
enough.
close
Yeah,
enough.
yeah. Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, you know. But no. We're not gonna do that. We're not gonna do that.
Yes,
No.
exactly. And then I grew up there and went to University of Michigan undergrad, and then met George in School of Public Health at Michigan. He obviously was in hospital administration, and I went more of the toxicology kind of science route there. Later on, went on to get my MBA at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois, and have been working for Lilly pharmaceutical company, Lilly USA, for many, many years. I almost don't want to say how many, but eventually I'll talk about my age. So this is my 20th year with the company. And I know that's unheard of. Most people jump around a lot. But I've had the fortunate opportunity to have a lot of different roles, both in marketing and sales. Currently, I'm in a sales leadership role and cover about 4 different states here. I live in Atlanta right now. So again, just happy to be here. And that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, let's backtrack. How was it? Because you brought it up. There is a difference, and especially back then, growing up in Southfield, the suburbs of Detroit. How was that different from those of like myself that grew up in the city? And how's that evolved and changed now? I know, but our listeners will be interested to know.
Yeah, so I mean, the funny thing is when you talk about, because it was a suburb that's right outside of Detroit, a lot of people grew up half their life in Detroit, half their life in Southfield, etc. There's a lot of overlap. I think probably the biggest difference is around the larger communities in the suburbs. It was a different feel from that perspective. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else is different.
Well, the demographics. What was the demographics back then, being in the Southfield compared to now? And what was some of you think your parents' way of thinking by making that jump into Southfield for you and your sibling?
Yeah. So the demographics back then, at least initially, it was kind of like 50-50 black white as far as the demographics. Now, as I got older, closer to high school, it was probably, at least where I live, was predominantly black. There was almost like one side that was predominantly black and the other side was still predominantly white. My high school was 85% black, but then the other high school was a lot more multicultural, I'd say. So those are some differences. I think my parents are from the South. So my parents are from Arkansas. And so moving to the Midwest, that was all they knew. And my dad did that for a job, for an opportunity for us to kind of live in a different environment.
Yeah. And so people may not, they say 85% black, major black, but Detroit, we're talking about 100% black, and we're talking about every school district. So
yes.
Coming from Southfield, there was a different cultural experience and a better integration. What was the process of you deciding to go to Michigan? Did you have a lot of schools on your plate? Was that always a dream? How'd that process go?
So Michigan was a dream, but I kind of wanted to go out of state too. My dad shut that down from a financial standpoint. And so Michigan obviously is a wonderful school. I'm so glad I went there for undergrad and all the experiences and all the people that I'm still friends with to this day. The great thing about Michigan is you get, to me, the best of both worlds. You get the high educational component, but you get all of the sports and everything else too. So I can't say enough about great things about Michigan and the friends I made there.
What was you thinking about going instead of
University of
Michigan?
Chicago. University of Chicago. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And my dad saw the bill for University of Chicago, and he was like, "Yeah,
No.
that's not happening."
And what did you study undergrad?
Undergrad, I studied biopsychology. I got a bachelor's of science in biopsychology with the thought that I was going to go to medical school. And then decided later on I didn't want to go that route, which led me to School of Public Health. Went there, thought maybe I'd want to do some research or something like that. Realized I'm not the research kid. I need to be around people. I like science. I like that environment, but I am also a people person. And so the pharmaceutical industry ended up being kind of the right mesh of kind of both worlds for me.
And you also pledged while you were there. What sorority did you pledge while there?
Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated, the best sorority. So yes, I did pledge. And that really added to the college experience for sure.
And do you remember like your first times in Michigan, the grad program, and those early days? It was unique for us there because it was a large community. I'm talking about African Americans for that year.
Yeah.
Do you remember like that first interaction? What your thought processes was then?
So the interesting thing, at least in my department too, they had not had any Black students, I think, for 7 to 10 years. And then in my department, there ended up being 4 of us at once. And so that was kind of unheard of. And then you talk about Pastor Hurt. I should call you Pastor Hurt. Pastor Hurt's hospital administration. There were tons. And so for one thing, that made that experience that much better. Just having more people with like experiences. I mean, we talk about the importance of being able to see yourself and others and hear those different experiences and how important that is within communities. That was the great thing. We got to lean on each other. We got to laugh with each other and learn from each other. So it was a great time.
Yeah, so we were all in the School of Public Health. There are various programs within the School of Public Health. Yours was health behavior, health education. Mine was health management. There are other, biostatistic, other areas. And there was a large community of us between those programs, especially in our program for Black men. It was a bunch of, comparatively speaking, there was a large amount of us in past years. I didn't know that y'all went 7 to 10 years without any. And there was a lot in your field. And I think from thereafter, not like we were unintentionally trailblazers. Thereafter, there was maintained a certain level. And we even got a friend like Dr. Dotson, who's actually a professor there now. So after you graduate, this is where you enter into where you're at now. What was that process like? Did you have a bunch of offers? Were you contemplating different things? I think I remember you were in Ann Arbor still at that point.
I was still considering medical school at the time, but then also looking for a job. I think my parents were like, "What are you gonna do? You can't live here, so what are you gonna do?" And ended up looking at a bunch of different companies. My dad actually worked for Lilly for 16 years, go figure. And I never thought I'd follow in the footsteps of the company that my dad worked for, at least at the time. But ended up interviewing there and doing really well and got multiple offers from different employers at Lilly within that organization, as well as other places, and decided that this was going to be the right fit for me. So I started off as a sales representative at the time, and I stayed in Ann Arbor for a good 5 to 6 years, and then got a promotion, moved to our home office in Indianapolis, did a ton of different roles in marketing, got a lot of different experiences, and then decided to go in the sales leadership arena and move to Atlanta to do sales leadership. So that's the skinny of my career.
When did the MBA come into play?
So the MBA, the great thing was that came into play in 2011, and it was company sponsored. So the great thing is my company paid for it, which is always nice. So always look into that. It's always better when somebody else can pay for your way. And it was because they had a small group of candidates, and you had to apply and have sponsorship and people supporting you going, and you had to get into one of the top, it's either 10 or 20 MBA schools. That was the thing. You had to make sure that you could get into one of those schools to get sponsorship. And I fortunately was trying to choose between University of Chicago and Northwestern, and was going to University of Chicago, ended up going to a class at Northwestern, and I was like, fell in love with Northwestern, and that's where I went.
And so not only did they pay for you to go to school, you were getting paid as you were in school as a student.
Too, but yes,
Yeah,
they were.
yeah. And you
Yes,
got a lot of travel out of it. Tell us some places you got to go as far as learning.
I got to go to Brazil, Germany. Some of my classmates, this is a regret, got to go to Israel, went to Argentina. So a lot of opportunity. I went to Hong Kong to take classes internationally. And the great thing about how it worked with my company is if it was related to school, you just got to go. So it was a wonderful
Be
opportunity.
clear what
And
you mean by that, ladies and gentlemen. When she said you got to go, that means they paid for her to go. So she, those of you that are listening and maybe thinking about professions and field, she was paid to go to school. She still had her job. She paid for her school, and they paid for her to travel the world, all at the same time. All this is taking place. You are experiencing great heights of success, professionally, financially. But I imagine there's a desire there for wifehood, motherhood, and those things
yeah,
just are not happening. And the one of those things that still is a possibility that I feel like, and obviously you feel like, it's not have to always be contingent on the other, is motherhood. When did
yes,
that? What did? How were you managing those feelings as you experienced those success? Certainly, you're an attractive woman. You're probably meeting people, but it's not working out. You're professional, you're intelligent, and so all those things play into your mind, I guess, as it relates to wanting to be a mother. Um,
yeah,
just tell me about that, even if there was times of difficulty, whatever you feel comfortable, or just talk through that. Talk
sure,
us through that.
sure. So the interesting thing is, I feel like it was when I hit my 30s when I really started thinking about. Obviously, I wanted to do it a certain way. I came from a family of, my grandparents were married for 74 years before my grandfather passed away. My parents have been married for 51 years, and I call them, when it was okay to like Bill Cosby, they were the Cliff and Claire Huxtable from the Cosby Show. And so and that's how I grew up. I was one of those fortunate kids to grow up like that. And I always tell my dad that was a blessing and a curse, because that's the kind of relationship and kind of person I wanted to be with. It, those things didn't work out. Again, I kept getting opportunities with work, but that piece wasn't coming, and I had this desire to be a mom. And it's interesting because there were ebbs and flows with that. And when I turned 38 is when I first started looking into just freezing my eggs, at least to quote unquote buy some time. Um, and went through some tests related to that and got at least a better understanding of my levels and egg, how many eggs that I had left. Because that's the interesting thing with women. When you're born, you have your full egg count. And so as you get older, they just get older with you. And so I remember the doctor saying at the time, "Hey, you're in a good situation now, but if you want to do this, you need to do it now." And I still hesitated because I still wanted to do it the traditional way for a number of reasons. One, that is just something that I knew and how I wanted to do things. And then I was also worried about the stigma. I mean, my own family, was not super excited about this when I started saying that I was thinking about becoming what I found out after I had my daughter, a single mom by choice is what it's called, or a solo parent. And so I actually moved to Atlanta like, hey, I'm going to give it some more time. I may meet someone, and gave it a few more years. And then when I turned 41, I decided to really get serious. I decided, to me, the urge to be a mom was, I didn't want to miss my opportunity. And I knew that the clock was ticking from the ability to have a biological child. And for me, I wanted to, at least, if possible, be able to experience being pregnant, all of those things. Um, and so I wanted to try that first. And so that's kind of been um, the journey.
You sort of answered it already, but just for clarity, adoption, was that ever a thought, and why, why
It was.
not?
It was. It was a thought. It was a serious thought. And I think even within, before I knew for sure, when I wanted to do this and having kids, I always thought, hey, even if I had my own kids, I thought about adopting a child. And I looked into it a little bit, but for me, there was just some kind of urge around having the experience of being pregnant, if I could, having a biological child. Not to say that even I wouldn't consider even adoption still now, but that's where my head was, and so I wanted to at least rule it out before going a different route.
Talk to us as much as you feel comfortable about the psychology of that whole process.
Yeah.
The maybe anxiety or feeling less than, as the clock begins. We've heard the saying before, as the biological clock is ticking,
Yeah.
as you are experiencing social life, and maybe at sometimes that anxiety or anxious or trying to jump the process, and like, oh, great great first date, let's go to Vegas. All those feelings happen in singlehood, I think,
Yeah.
and especially as you get older, and then I think even more especially for a female. Just as much as you feel comfortable, talk to us about that journey of it.
So the interesting thing with me, at least, I purposely, George, didn't want to. Oh, after that first date, let's sit down and talk about how do we feel, or after a few dates. And something my dad always said is, you stay too long in relationships. You need to get in, and when you find out that's not right, get out. Um, but for me, it was. I mean, if I think about the relationship component to it, I've been in a bunch, or a few longer term relationships, thinking that maybe things would work out. And there's a psychological piece to it from the perspective I probably did stay too long because of those urges to, you put so much into this relationship, and then you want to progress to hopefully getting married and having children as well. So that's one component. So if you leave, then you have to start over. And I think that's hard for anyone. I think also you go through some self-esteem issues too. You see, you think you're being a good person, you think you're being a good partner to someone, and you wonder why it's not working out for you. You see it, you see your friends getting married, and you're very happy for them. But then you question why you're not finding that person. In addition, you see people having children, you get that urge, you want to do that too. So there's a huge psychological component to it. And quite frankly, there's a huge psychological component to making the decision I made. And I think it took me so long to just say, I'm going to be comfortable doing this, because I was so worried about what my family would think. I was so worried about what other people would think. I was worried about the financial burden of it. I was worried about how is my child going to feel that I made a decision, um, without them, to decide to be a single parent, because that's hard on a child. And then how are you going to talk through that? And for me, I didn't want to, um, decide and ask a friend, hey, you want to co-parent and like have a kid together. That wasn't something that I was comfortable with. I would only do that with somebody that I knew I was with and we were trying to have a relationship. So I did it with a sperm donor. And so that's a whole nother emotional piece for sure.
Well, let's get into that. Let's walk through what that process is. Someone may be listening, just curious. Walk us through the A to Z
Okay.
to what that process is, and then also, if you could, as much as again you feel comfortable sharing the fiscal demands of such a thing.
Yes. So when I finally decided, yeah, this is something, I remember talking to my friends about it. I remember talking to my parents about it. And people that know my parents, my mom's looking like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't go do this. And I just decided, hey, I'm going to just do a lot without having a lot of conversations with people, which I think is a good and a bad thing. It kind of helps you not worry as much what everybody else is thinking, but then you also don't have the support that you need. And it's something where you need a lot of support. You need family, you need friends, you need people that you feel like you can talk to. So I went and talked to a fertility specialist, and they do a number of tests again to figure out how are your levels. They look at your egg follicle counts, so they get a gauge of how many eggs do you still have from a reserve standpoint, and how likely you would be to actually be able to not only carry a child, but the likelihood that you'll be successful in this process. And you can do it a lot. Some people do IUI, which is definitely different from IVF. And I can get into some of those specifics if we want to talk about that. For me too, you also have to do a test called an HCG, which they try and see if your fallopian tubes are clear, because you need that in order to carry a child the natural way. So they try to see if there are any problems. And I remember it was the day before Thanksgiving that I went to have that test. And again, if you've never tried to have a child, you don't know if there are any problems or issues or anything. And I remember specifically that test was super painful for me. Now, normally it isn't for most people, but it ended up that both of my fallopian tubes were blocked, and I had no idea about that. So I found out that day that I would not have been able to have a child naturally, even if I had a partner. And that, even though I knew I was going to do IVF, knowing that as a woman, knowing that your body didn't work the way you wanted it to, I remember I burst out in tears, and I'm not a big crier. And so I remember walking out that day before Thanksgiving. That was 2018, 2017. And just, that was a very tough time. And then, after a little while, they go through everything with you and you talk about your options. And for me, the only option was in vitro fertilization. And so the process of that, it is a grueling process. And you have to take multiple shots. Like, I think at one point I was taking 3 shots a day over long periods of time. And I used to keep all of my sharp containers for my injections. And I took over 200 plus injections. I used to keep a tally, and then it just got too many to keep a tally. And the interesting thing as you're going through the process is a lot of times the doctor would say, get somebody that will shoot the injections for you, or there's certain injections that you have to take at the same time every day. And so in the beginning, I was trying to drive to my cousin's house or drive to a friend's house and let them give me the injection. And then I decided, that was too difficult. So I ended up having to inject myself. And again, that's a process, and people react to that differently. And the whole purpose of the injections is to have your body release more than one egg within a month. You're trying to get as many eggs as possible and for those follicles to grow, so that when there's an egg retrieval, when they do the egg retrieval, you have more chances to get a healthy egg. And so for me, went through that process, and then I remember, and so then they do an egg retrieval. So the whole point, and I'm going to go back and forth before. So as you're doing that, I was also having to pick a sperm donor. And I will say that is a very overwhelming process. And it's almost like, it sounds crazy to say this, but there's so many different sperm banks, and you have to look into whatever's important to you as far as sperm banks. And it's like Zappos for sperm banks. There's so many choices that it's overwhelming. I had a condition where everyone is exposed to a particular virus, and they call it the CMV virus. Majority of people are exposed to that. I wasn't. So for me, I could only have a sperm donor that also wasn't exposed to this same virus. And so they had to be CMV negative. Now for sperm banks, that usually cuts out about 75% of sperm donors. So it shrinks your options. And then for me, I wanted to have a Black donor. That was the goal. But with my not being exposed to this virus in my particular fertility place, they only wanted, some are okay with it, with not running it the same way. But for mine, I needed to find a negative sperm, somebody who was CMV negative, that it cut out a lot of Black men. And quite frankly, there aren't a lot at a sperm donor clinics anyway. And so I wanted to, the thing from a religious standpoint too, is you feel like when you're picking, I felt like I was playing too much, like I was playing God's role. Because you can pick hair color, you can pick eye color, you could look at height. I mean, there's so many things you could look at. You get people's test scores. Like there are so many things that you could say, these are the things that are important to me. And I didn't want it to be like a laundry list of things that were important for me. Obviously, I had to have somebody that was CMV negative for health reasons for the baby. I wanted somebody that was open to, when my child turned 18, being contacted, because since I'm making this decision for my child, I didn't want to take away any chance of them being able to know any other aspect of their family, of that whole other biological side. So I wanted them to be open. And quite frankly, that took out a lot of Black men as well. I wanted to look at, from a genetic standpoint, I have a pretty strong colon cancer and certain cancers in my family and certain heart diseases. So I wanted to make sure that whomever I picked didn't have those same issues. And then there was a component of trying to get some indication from an intelligence level, which is hard. And quite frankly, you get to see pictures. Usually it's baby pictures, and a small percentage it's adult pictures. You get to hear people's voices too. And so from that perspective, I wanted to have somebody that I actually would think that I'd like them if I met them. So those were the things that were important to me. So you go through that process, and George, jump in because it feels like a monologue now.
No, you're good. I wanted people to feel the overwhelming nature of it.
Yes.
For my next question, which is, what was your support system through this process like?
So that it was a small group of core friends, and one of my cousins who is now my daughter's godmother. And so that was the support system. And the great thing about my cousin, Dawn, she's also an OBGYN. So that helped too through this process as well, and made it a lot more bearable. But I had a couple of friends that kind of helped me narrow in what was really important to me in picking that. And I either had a friend or my cousin that went to all of these different sessions. So after you finally pick the sperm donor, And then you go through the process of all those injections, you do an egg retrieval. And so it's a procedure where they take multiple eggs out of your body. And for me, because of my age, I decided to get genetic testing, which everybody doesn't decide to do. I got genetic testing because it came back that once they took my eggs, they took the sperm donor, that I had 14 embryos. That's overwhelming too, because what if they're all good? Then, what do you do with that? And there's also much so a spiritual component to that. Like, depending on how you feel about these are children, like, what do you do with all of that? Now, when I did the genetic testing, the first time, none of them came back healthy. And so all 14 would have resulted in a miscarriage if they had been transferred. Now, the good thing from the perspective of doing the genetic testing, I didn't have to go through the pain of having multiple miscarriages and not knowing that none of them were viable. Also, me personally, I thought I figured out every scenario of, hey, maybe it won't work, maybe this, that. But for whatever reason, I never thought I'd get a lot and then they just wouldn't be healthy. And that has a lot to do with my age, because I am a healthy person. And so I try to live a healthy life, but a lot of it has to just do with what I said initially. Like, you're born with your eggs, and the older you get, there's just less that are viable.
Yeah, we're here live talking to Erika Hardy. She's been brave enough, courageous enough to let us into her IVF process and her beautiful, wonderful daughter, how that led in those spiritual developments. Share this page, like this page if you're listening via Facebook. Be on the lookout to be able to listen to this whole interview from top to bottom, from the beginning to the end. We are grateful for it. I found a few things extremely interesting when you talk about spiritual, theological components to this. And those who say they believe, or at times they have to question that in the sovereignty of God and that all things work together. That you weren't able, this would have been your only choice to have a child anyway. Because from a biological scientific reality, and you would never found that out. And some of the same processes of difficulty that you experience in this, obviously different, you would experience that in the traditional husband, wife, marital bed, intimacy way. And again, that's not trying to make one right or wrong or compare or compete, but it is just to say that it's just interesting how those things manifest and unfolded. I think also what I find interesting in this process is it cannot be compared to something that did not take a lot of thought, a lot of prayer, a lot of intellect, that's why I asked about the support system, a lot of people encourage you. But at the same time, for that, the wisdom of you having that circle small, because if it's expanded, I believe that there have been a psychological burden from everybody who have no shortage of, especially in our culture today. There's no shortage of opinion. There's no shortage of people trying to moralize, spiritualize, theologicalize, overtly, I would say, those things. As you're walking through those things and going through this process, what is work life like? What is your social interaction, be it dating or whatever, like going through this process? Like, and I ask that question for people to get a feel of the sacrifice. If you're contemplating something like this, to understand, be very fully aware that it's not like just dropping some money on the table and making a few stops. And you've done that already, but just answer that question for that.
Yeah. So one thing, and you mentioned this, the difference of doing it when you're a couple is, one, you have that support, that very intimate support, and they're going through it with you. My friends and my cousin tried to be that for me, but it's just different, right? It's different than somebody else having the same quote unquote loss or kind of journey. So there's that component. I came from, I grew up going to church, and I grew up in a very spiritual home, and my parents struggled with this. They struggled with it from a spiritual perspective, as did I. They struggled with it. What will the church people say about uh, my daughter? And so that was a whole process. That was a very tense and hard process with related to work. So I have a team of 13 people that report to me, and I tried to hide it from them for a while, but I had to go to the doctor quite a bit for shots, for checkups, for all of this, to make sure that my body was reacting right to it. So at one point, I just ended up telling them what was going on. And that was probably the best decision, because then they understood, and they kind of walked this journey with me. And that was the unexpected support that I didn't necessarily want to seek, but I also found. I remember I was actually with one of my sales reps when the doctor called to tell me that none of the embryos were viable. And you're like shocked. I'm in the car with him, and he's seeing my reaction. And then we have to go to work for the rest of the day. And so your mind is someplace else. Also, a lot of people experience a lot of mood swings. I was fortunate to not have that side effect to the medications, but a lot of people do. And so I used to have people, both at work and personally, like, if I start acting a little crazy, I need you to tell me, so that I'm self-aware that either I'm heightenedly upset about something or all of that. So I wanted to be very self-aware during the process. But you constantly second guess your decision too. You constantly say, should I look at this like it just wasn't meant to be? Because if it were, then all of these things would have happened, and God would have given me this opportunity. Or do you look at it as God has fertility doctors in place and all of this medicine in place, so that if you need help in the process, there are options for you. And I would pray to God all the time, if this shouldn't happen, if this isn't meant to be, then just don't let it happen. And that's a strange prayer, but that was part of my prayer.
Yeah, it's a good prayer. Had you, I want to go back for a reason. Had you heard of anybody that went through this process before?
Yes. I mean, I heard, yes. I had a few friends at work that talked about it. But the thing is, a lot of people don't talk about it. A lot of people don't want to talk about it. One, because I think there's less of a stigma, but there's still a stigma. And you struggle with, why couldn't I just do this the natural way? Like, why do I have to go through all of this to have a child? And then you also don't want to talk about it because what if it doesn't work? What if you have a miscarriage? What if you have this? You don't want people constantly like, are you okay? Are you okay? Because that's another emotional component to it. And so I didn't have people super close to me. Like, I didn't have family that I knew had gone
Right.
through it, or close friends. I did have some close friends at work that had just gone through it. So they helped me through the process, through that process as well.
When is the first time that you really heard about it? I know you hear the term, but when was the first time that you heard about it and you personally started to say, "Hey, I want to investigate this"?
It was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, when, I mean, I guess I have one friend that had gone through it, but even I remember her whole journey of it. I didn't necessarily associate it with me though. I was like, I want to be there for her, but I didn't associate it with, this is something that I want to do. It was, again, when I got to that point where I was like, I know I want to be a mom, and I know I want to try and do this and be pregnant, where I started reading about it and talking to friends, or at least acquaintances that I knew had been through the process, and finding out more information about it. But it's interesting when it's in theory or when it's happening to somebody else, and then how it changes when it's happening to you and how you see
Right.
things so much clearer or differently.
Mhm. What was some of the other negative feedback that you got as it relates to making this decision?
Well, I'm single, and so, how can you, like, why would you do that to a child? Even the sperm donor component to it, it's like, so you are willingly um not giving your child a father, a whole other family, a whole other piece from a biological standpoint, that they may not necessarily know that whole other side. I'm older, so what if something happens to you? What are you doing for that child? How are you setting that child up for success? Um, so there was a lot of negativity, but then there was also surprisingly a lot of positivity, where people were like, "I wish I had done that." Women that had gotten past that age and that stage, that wish they had, quote unquote, said, been strong enough, their words, not mine, to do it. And that was a pleasant surprise through this process too.
So when did you find out that hey, everything is going to work? When did it get real to you? How was that delivery process for you and uniquely in this situation?
Yeah.
If as much as you feel comfortable, walk us through that, the good parts of it.
Sure. So after that first time, is the weird thing is, everything is based off of your cycle each month, and so it's a long process. I started this process when I was 41, and I had Marlo at 43. And so it was over a 2-year period of time where it had to be the right time of the month when you were taking the shots. Everything had to go right. Everything had to grow right. And then there's even a situation where labs close for a period of time, so you can't do anything. I couldn't decide on the sperm donor, so I had to push the time back there. You have to make sure all of that lines up. So then the second time that I went through it, had the egg retrieval. It's crazy. I ended up having 21 embryos this time, did the genetic testing, and two came back healthy. So, two came back healthy, and that was kind of the best news to hear. And then I very much so remember and have a tasteful video of when they actually do the transfer and insert the embryo. And then you have to wait a period of time before you can take a pregnancy test. And I remember uh, the first time I had that pregnancy test, um, and I remember getting super excited because I had to take the test before actually going to the doctor, and then them confirming it. And you still take shots for the first 10 weeks of your pregnancy to try and make sure that you hold the baby well. And I remember getting past that 12 weeks, like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, this is really going to happen. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this is really going to happen. So
Mhm.
there is this joy, and there's also this crazy fear as well. So,
Wow. And from delivery to those early times, making that transition from a psychological standpoint, how was that? Be it the ups or the downs or both?
rough. It was rough. Specifically because I had a difficult pregnancy too. I felt fine, but I was somebody that ended up having high blood pressure throughout. I got gestational diabetes. I was hospitalized multiple times. And so, again, being pregnant by yourself is very difficult. And so you have to get in the mindset of that, and you have to have the right support system. And then my daughter came a month early. I remember going to a regular routine appointment, and then them saying, "We got to send you to the hospital and you have to be induced." And I'm like, no, you don't. Nobody's here. You can't do that. So there was that piece. And she was born 4 pounds, 4 ounces. So she was tiny. Um, and so there was that whole process. So she stayed in the hospital a little bit longer than me, but was able to come home. And just I think this is universal, but the pure exhaustion of for me, I decided to breastfeed, trying to learn how to do that, being up all night. My mom did come down to help for sure, but just all of that process. I realized I read a lot about being pregnant, but not a lot about actually having the baby. So note to self, people read about having the baby and then what to do as well. So it's been, you learn something every day. I think you also learn how strong and how resilient you can be. And you also question, like, would this have been better if I had somebody else to talk to about your decision making? I think there are pros and cons to that. Like, one pro is I can make all of the decisions. Like, I don't have to align with somebody else about how we're going to raise, what we're going to do, all of that kind of stuff. But then the flip side is you don't have that other person. And it's hard, like, especially during COVID. I was trying to work full time and have Marlo right here before I got some help. And you're on like 24 hours a day. I was fortunate, again, with my company, they had just changed the maternity leave policy where we could take 4 months paid and then you could take up to 3 additional months unpaid. And I saved up all my vacation and ended up getting about 5 months paid and took another month and a half unpaid. So I was able to be home for 6.5 months to adjust. And I will say it is the scariest, but it's the best decision I ever made. I'm so happy that I decided to go this route. I wouldn't change it. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes. And I don't think people fully get how hard it is being a single parent and everything falling on you, but it's so worth it. It's been so worth it for me. And my little girl, Marlo, she's spunky and determined, and we're going to have an interesting ride, but I love it.
Tell us a little bit more about her. Tell us a little bit about the naming process and a
Yeah.
little bit about who she is.
Yes. So her name is Marlo, and she's 15 months now. And she is, it's like, I mean, she's the joy of my life. When people talk about your child is like your heart beating outside your body, she's my heartbeat. She's definitely my heartbeat. Now, I mean, like I said, it's rough, and I'm talking about the good stuff. There are a lot of times where you're like, I need a second, or that component as well. Her name, the funny thing is her name, I chose it just because years ago, I met a little girl named Marlo, loved the name. And that is the simple way of what I chose. But I found out later that her name actually means beloved. It also means gift. And so without me even knowing those things before, I feel like there was some divine component to me actually picking Marlo for her name. So that's a little bit about her.
Wow. The love gift. The love
Yeah.
gift.
Yes.
Sort of like the whole situation working behind the scenes. Take a minute, take a minute, take a minute or just a few seconds or whatever you feel comfortable with,
Mm-hmm.
and just speak to maybe some young lady that's in both either or stages. They're in the stage of thinking about the process, or they're in the stage of being frustrated with the desire to be a mother, but want to be a wife first.
Yes, yes. So for the woman that is thinking about it, if it's something that's in your heart and you feel like your life wouldn't be completely complete without having this opportunity, take the step. I know it's difficult, and it is difficult. Create a support system, people that you can talk to about the situation, and have faith that you know what's best for you, and you have the ability to write your own story. Nobody can tell you how you should live your life. And pray that you can have the opportunity to have, to me, such a gift. And for those that I was you who wanted to be married first, and not to say that I won't get married now, but for me, and given my age, I had to make this decision before that decision was able to happen. And so, again, it's trust yourself. Trust that you're making the right decision for yourself. Do research, talk to people, talk to doctors. I say go to doctors sooner to even understand your options. I would say that to many women, even much younger than I am. Find out what your options are. Because for some, you can freeze your eggs so that you have those younger eggs earlier and make decisions later in your life. But research, talk to people, and you can do it. I know I'm very early in this journey, and there are some really, really hard days and frustrating days. And I swear the lack of sleep is a little bit crazy. But the joy of having her, and knowing that I believe that we will be very close. I will work very hard so that we are, is, there are no words. It's priceless. That part is priceless.
Well, we definitely need to have a follow-up conversation about just thinking through those futuristic components. You've been gracious with your time. I do want to say, unlike many of my peer group, I don't claim to know everything or dare to know everything about God. But what I do know is I do know you, I do know God, and I do know that from any intellectual, theological, spiritual, whatever term you want to use to put in that category, this has divine hands all on it. And certainly I'm here to help in any way that we can help. I think that support system, that family is not always blood, as we've learned that saying that came out, all kin folks ain't kin folks. And that's a negative connotation, but that's also a positive connotation to that as well. That it doesn't take those things. And if we are really Christian and we're really church, I don't think we always need to be trying to figure out why people made decisions in their personal business, but how you can help people in light of decisions that they made, even though you may not agree or understand it. But that's not how we mostly operate. We would spend more energy just stating our opinions and tearing people down negatively. And we just know that I was talking to a friend of mine's, and I said we glorify. It's a great book called by David Garland and his wife called Flawed Families of the Bible. Like, look at Jesus' family. Look at where the tribe of Israel, Jewish people, come from, that family structure. Genesis 37, Joseph, 12 brothers, hating on them, mother dying in childbirth with Benjamin. This is what God chose to bring the chosen people from. The 12 tribes of Israel, the tribes of Jacob, sons of Jacob. Judah sleeping with his father's girlfriends, and the whole situation with all that took place with Judah and his son in Genesis 38. So if God can get stuff out of that, we can't even have a conversation if you got a problem with this process as it relates to God. Again, it's not saying you have to understand everything. Not saying that you got to agree with everything.
Sure.
But you haven't walked in those shoes. You haven't been a woman with a desire to be a mother. And so you need to at least want to hear from that perspective, because you haven't lived that perspective. But as we know, that doesn't stop people from being the negative Nancys that they are. Speaking of negative,
I
go
will
ahead.
say one thing, because I feel it's important to say. Yes, my parents took a second, but as soon as
Yes,
Marlo came into this world,
yes.
good Lord, I was no longer important, and it's all about Barlow. So,
Yes. I
so,
love
so
that
for
part of the story. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes.
yes, when people have that fear that, you know, my family may not accept, it's totally different. Once the child is there, it is a different story. So I felt the need to say that as well.
And that's in all frames of life. For men
Yes.
that don't want the child, don't want to have the child, don't feel like it's the right situation. But once that child is here, our emotions, you're not human if your emotions just don't shift to like it's about this life. Is if we're saying God orchestrates everything in life, and if he advanced technology for we can have the internet, cell phones, maybe he can advance technology for family structures that have never been perfect and ideal. Matter of fact, there's no such thing. Even your parents who've been married 50 years, grandparents married 74 years, that wasn't free of drama,
Right.
differences, frustrations. So there's no ideal anything.
Mhm.
It's about us loving and caring and showing as much as possible. And so I'm glad you mentioned that your parents was not exempt from the hypocrisy of grandparents that comes um, comes across the board. I was just in Detroit, and my mother and her grandkids are just shaking my head like, "What in the world is
Who
this?"
are you? That's
Yeah,
what I say about my mom. Who
yeah,
are you?
yeah. Who are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a psychology behind that I understand as well, even though I joke about it. Speaking of that, on a I guess lighter note, but also more in some ways more serious note, did you watch that debacle of a debate last night?
Yes, I did. It was just that. It was worse than children.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was toddlers. I mean,
yeah,
small toddlers. Yes, it was terrible.
yeah,
You know, I don't know what else you can say besides it was terrible.
yeah. And it, you know what? For me, it was like it's so many levels to the embarrassment, to the the debacle of it. And that first of all, if you're American, you should be embarrassed. If you've
Absolutely.
done international travel,
Oh my God.
how people don't make those separations, Republican, Democrat, black,
Yeah.
white. No, they look at America. And just to think that there is a large population of people that you and I bump shoulders with every day that find that behavior acceptable, not even acceptable, find that be something to be proud of, where we can't even legitimately. I mean, most people at this point have decided where they're going to go and move how they
Absolutely.
want to move. I trust God despite whoever wins, whatever party, whatever person. But just the notion of the exchange of ideas and be able just to hear from a clarity standpoint, what did this person feel about this? What does that person feel about this? And then on top of all that, to be going through a pandemic. I mean, it's one thing to be doing this during times of leisure and relaxation and everything as well, but be going through such a perplexing global issue, the country that is supposed to be the leading world power. This is how you present yourself in such a way. It is greatly disturbing on so
Mhm.
many levels. And I don't want to. I'm not like a Biden puppeteer or fan, but I don't want to put him in that boat. I think he actually was trying to um, as lack of sharpness that I think he has. I think he was at least trying to represent the format and present it in a certain way. And I don't think
And
anything Trump
about
was
the issue.
doing, and I don't
Yeah.
think anything he was doing he hadn't done before. Is just we wasn't just as empathetic to it because it was Hillary. Because for some reason, people don't like her.
Yeah.
I'm yet to understand that. Um, but they like her husband. But that's another thing that's confusing.
There's a whole nother segment, right, George?
There's a whole nother segment, and it's probably the same reason why they would like don't like a Barack Obama. I think at the end of the day, we could say is racism and sexism behind it. If you put a male gender on Hillary with that same resume, she'll be president for 16 years. But that's another story for another day. But yeah, you better have some bigger hope than the U.S. government at this point. I just tell you that. Mine is on Christ. It's not on any of this because
absolutely.
There's
people should vote. People have to vote.
There's some trying times. We can have that conversation too. And I'm not saying people shouldn't vote. I'm just saying, especially as old heads, as we get older, to young people, we need to offer them something more than go vote. Because you present this presentation to them, we have to give them more than every 4 year shaming you to the poll. Certainly, I understand and embrace why that is being emphasized, but we have to, especially those of us that are older, we have to give young people something more than vote, and informing them of what these militial powers, what these political powers are, but what the structures behind them are, what the laws and how those laws are made, roles like yourself, how those things can affect the freedom to make decisions like you're making here, or even across the board of just living a life. So, yeah, vote, but I think we got to be careful that every 4 years we're rushing people to say vote because we want a certain person out the office. We got to school them on more stuff than that and speak more comprehensive than just go vote. And you can't. And I don't agree that you can't be a part of the conversation if you choose not to. Even though I understand again why people say stuff like that. Yeah. Just want to leave it on that note. Pick on that because it's fresh on everybody's mind. There's so many things I wanted to commentate for that. We'll get a little check out tomorrow. We'll have another pastor in there. We'll talk a little bit more about that on tomorrow. Yeah, so it's not just informing people on young people why voting is important, but informing young people on why so many other things are important, such as discipline, hard work, investing, so many things.
Yes.
You do those other things, you won't have to tell them to vote because they'll already have a buy-in to the social development of the culture. Those things will come through. Well, let me pray, and thank you all for listening. Share this. One of the greatest conversations we've had on our platform just so far. So please, y'all, share this. Share this to our sisters, and we celebrate the maternal instinct of women, even those that are not natural mothers. We wouldn't make it without women, and not just speaking generally, but the maternal instincts, and that what led to this event. The desire to be caring is what I'm talking about when I say maternal instincts. Father, we thank you for Erika. We thank you for Marlo. We thank you for those that are listening. We pray that we use this story, this testimony to encourage hope, perseverance, determination, and love. Thank you for loving grandparents, and thank you for their evolution into understanding this decision. Pray for those that may be struggling with this decision, with this process, or in this same season in their life of trying to make these types of decisions. And I pray, Father, that you would bless this single mother in every aspect of her life, and the support system, myself and others, would be there to help her journey through full development. All these things we pray for Jesus' sake. Amen. All right, y'all, we out. Tune in tomorrow. All right, thanks for listening.